To
I sat
John,
motionless in
a
the
life
corner of the
lived
living
with
room at the
purpose,
Sterling
honor,
estate,
and profound
spine
impact
aligned
on
like
us all.
rebar,
We
hands
raise our
flat against
glasses
my
to his
thighs,
memory.
in the posture drilled into me through a decade of military discipline. Around me, 40 guests turned my grandmother's wake into something closer to a real estate convention than a memorial service. The lawyer had barely loosened his briefcase latch when my father rose from his leather armchair, voice cutting through the murmur like a gavel striking oak. 3 commercial properties in downtown San Diego go to Garrett. As for Victoria, the Air Force has provided for her adequately. She neither requires nor will receive a single dollar from this estate. Applause erupted. Actual applause. My mother nodded, lips pressed into a thin line of approval. The bitterness climbed my throat, metallic and sharp, not from the loss of money, but from the surgical precision of their cruelty. My pulse hammered against my carotid artery, a drumbeat only I could hear, but my face remained locked in the neutral expression forged through 10,000 hours of standing watch. Across the room, Garrett raised his wineglass in my direction, eyes glittering with the particular satisfaction of someone who has just inherited millions without lifting a finger. Madison, his fiancée, giggled beside him, her acrylic nails curved and predatory, tapping against crystal that cost more than most people's monthly rent. None of them understood that Major Victoria Sterling had not flown in from Joint Base Lewis McChord to beg for scraps. I glanced down at the aluminum Halliburton case locked between my boots, containing documentation that had remained dormant for 3 years, and calculated how quickly their smiles would fracture when they realized the will my father just referenced was worthless paper. The Sterling house smelled wrong. It should have carried the scent of my grandmother's lavender sachets and the yeast of fresh-baked sourdough. Instead, the air was thick with lukewarm shrimp cocktail and cheap Chardonnay poured into expensive Waterford flutes. The guests, mostly my father's business associates and Garrett's drinking buddies from the marina, had converted Eleanor Sterling's memorial into a networking opportunity. They clustered near the catering table, voices low but animated, discussing property values and capital gains strategies. Not one person mentioned her name. Not one shared a memory of the woman who had built a commercial real estate portfolio from a $5,000 bank loan in 1965. I was an ink blot on their pastel canvas. My Air Force dress blues too severe for their country club aesthetic. The service ribbons on my chest, Joint Service Achievement Medal, Air Force Achievement Medal, National Defense Service Medal, might as well have been hieroglyphics. To them, I was decoration gone wrong, the daughter who had chosen government salary over family legacy. Garrett sprawled on the sectional sofa my grandmother had special ordered from Italy, feet propped on the mahogany coffee table she had refinished by hand. His arm draped across Madison's shoulders, with the casual entitlement of someone who has never been denied anything. Her voice carried across the room, pitched just loud enough for strategic eavesdropping. "Just wait, babe, that Porsche 911 will be sitting in our garage by next week." The greed was not even camouflaged anymore. It breathed the oxygen from the room, alive and pulsing. My father adjusted his tie, positioning himself at the room's center like a king addressing vassals. He did not look at me. His gaze swept over my head as if I were furniture, something to step around on the way to more important destinations. Garrett is the firstborn. He needs solid foundation to build a family. He carries the Sterling name forward. The pause was theatrical, calculated to let the silence amplify his next words. As for Victoria, she chose to leave this family to play soldier. She has her pension, she has her health insurance, she has that GI Bill program. Uncle Sam has taken care of her. Therefore, my mother's legacy will go to the one who actually needs it. Garrett. The room erupted again. They were applauding my dispossession. They were cheering for the logic that my service, my sacrifice, my financial independence were the precise reasons I deserved punishment. I turned my head slowly toward my mother, searching for a single thread of fairness. Diane Sterling stared down at her hands, fingers worrying the strand of costume pearls at her throat. When she finally met my eyes, there was no apology, only the resigned exhaustion of someone who had stopped fighting years ago. She walked over, steps hesitant, and placed a cold hand on my shoulder. Her whisper was staged loud enough for nearby guests to admire her maternal grace. "Victoria, please don't make a scene. Your brother is sensitive. You're the strong one, right? You've always been the survivor. You don't need these old buildings. Let him have this so the family can have peace. There it was, the weaponization of my resilience. In her worldview, the fact that I did not cry meant I did not bleed. She was asking me to carve off my own flesh to feed her spoiled golden child, simply because I possessed the capacity to endure the pain. Garrett stood, face flushed with alcohol and arrogance, glass raised toward me like a trophy. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Mom. I promised to make this family proud. His smirk was a blade. Madison shrieked with laughter, a sound that scraped against my nerves like metal on concrete. The humiliation was complete. They had stripped me down, invalidated my existence, and were now dancing on the ashes. I felt the weight of the Halliburton case against my boot. Inside were 9 property deeds stamped with red seals, signed and notarized 3 years ago. I closed my eyes for a microsecond. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. The box breathing technique Navy SEALs use to control heart rate kicked in, forcing my pulse down from sprint to steady jog. The rage was still there, but now it was cold, focused, ammunition. I did not stand to scream. I did not throw my glass. I simply looked past my father, past Garrett, and locked eyes with the family attorney, Mr. Hollis, who was already reaching for his pen to finalize paperwork. My voice cut through the celebration like a scalpel through silk, flat and devoid of emotion. Mr. Hollis, before you let them sign anything, are you absolutely certain your file was updated after May of 2021? The question hung in the air. Hollis blinked, pen hovering over signature line, brow furrowing. Excuse me, the file was last updated in 2018. Why would that matter? I did not answer him. Not with words. I bent down and lifted the aluminum case, setting it onto the glass coffee table with a metallic thud that silenced the room. With one deliberate sweep of my arm, I pushed aside half-empty wine glasses and crystal flutes, clearing the battlefield. Click, click. The sound of latches snapping open was crisp and loud in the sudden quiet. I lifted the lid. Inside, navy blue binders and stacks of legal documents sat organized with military precision. I reached in and pulled out the first document, holding it high enough for the overhead chandelier to illuminate the official red stamp of the San Diego County Clerk. This is a grant deed for the Pacific Beach property. I dropped it onto the table in front of Hollis. Owner of record, Victoria Eleanor Sterling. Date of recording, May 14th, 2021, 3 years ago. I reached back into the case. Here's the deed for the Garnet Avenue rentals. Transferred. Slap. The paper hit the table. Here's the warehouse on Miramar Road. Transferred. Slap. Here's the family home we are standing in right now. Transferred. Slap. I looked at my father, who had turned a shade of gray I had never seen on a living person. The will you just read is worthless, Dad. Grandma didn't leave you the empire. She gave it to the only person she trusted not to burn it to the ground. The room erupted into murmurs. Hollis snatched the first deed, hands trembling as he pulled reading glasses from his pocket. He scrutinized the seal, checked the notary acknowledgement. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. Richard, this is authentic. The chain of title is clear. It was a transfer into a revocable living trust, then a quitclaim deed to Victoria. It supersedes the will. The assets were not Margaret's to give when she died. They already belonged to Victoria. The empire my father thought he controlled, the legacy he had just handed to his golden boy, dissolved instantly. He collapsed back into his armchair, mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. The power he had wielded over me, the money, the inheritance, the threat of exclusion, was gone. But Garrett was not ready to accept defeat. His face twisted into something ugly, veins bulging in his neck as the reality of his destitution hit him. You liar. You manipulated her. She was senile. She didn't know what she was signing. You forced her. He charged at me, fist cocked back. I did not flinch, did not step back. I dropped into a modified ready stance, feet shoulder-width apart, hands raised to guard my center line. I was a trained officer. He was a drunk fraternity boy in a suit. Don't touch me, Garrett. My voice dropped to command register, the tone that made subordinates snap to attention. She was crazy. Everyone knows Grandma was losing her mind. This is fraud. No, she wasn't. The voice came from the back of the room. Dylan, my second cousin, stepped forward through the crowd of stunned guests. He was a mechanic who drove a beat-up Silverado and hated the pretension of my immediate family. He walked until he stood next to me, arms crossed, work boots planted solid. I drove her to the lawyer's office, Garrett. I sat there for 2 hours while she reviewed every single paragraph with Mr. Davis. She wasn't crazy. She was heartbroken. She told the lawyer exactly why she was doing it. She said she was doing it because you were stealing from her, and Uncle Richard was covering it up. A collective gasp went through the room. The guests, the business partners, the hangers-on, they all turned their eyes to Garrett and my father. The mask had slipped. They were not the grieving family. They were the thieves. Garrett stood frozen, chest heaving, trapped by undeniable truth. He looked at my mother, begging for her to fix it. But Diane had buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. I bent down and picked up the deeds, dusting them off with exaggerated care. Then I placed them back into the briefcase and snapped it shut. I looked at my parents. You always said Garrett needed a chance to grow up. Well, this is his chance, sink or swim. I turned my gaze to Garrett, who looked small and pathetic without his unearned inheritance. I'm giving you 48 hours to clear your personal effects out of the management office. If you're not gone by Monday at 5 p.m., I will have the county sheriff remove you for trespassing. And Garrett, I've already audited the books. Don't try to delete anything. I have backups. I picked up the handle of the case. It felt lighter now. Enjoy the shrimp cocktail. I turned and walked toward the front door, boots clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor, leaving the chaos behind me. To understand why I did not scream at the lawyer or throw my drink in my brother's face, you have to go back 15 years. You have to sit at the Sterling dinner table and feel the specific texture of silence that was reserved just for me. The memory was thick with the smell of hickory-smoked barbecue ribs and the blare of ESPN. My father sat at the head of the table, wielding his fork like a scepter, dispensing his attention like limited currency. Garrett, tell me about that touchdown pass in the second quarter. Garrett, mouthful of cornbread, shrugged with practiced nonchalance. Coach called the wrong play. Honestly, if the offensive line wasn't so slow, I would have had 3 more. But yeah, that one throw was elite. Dad nodded sagely, blaming the coach, the line, the referees, blaming the entire world for the fact that Garrett's varsity team had actually lost the game 14-38. In Dad's version of reality, Garrett never lost. He was only failed by others. At the far end of this table, I quietly slid a piece of paper onto the tablecloth. It was my semester report card. Straight A's. Calculus A+, Physics A. I smoothed the edges, waiting for a pause in the football commentary, waiting for a glance. The paper sat there between the coleslaw and the napkins, white and stark. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, Dad looked in my direction. Victoria, he grunted, pointing his knife at the empty platter. We're out of ribs. Go check the kitchen and clear these plates while you're up. He had not even seen the paper. Or maybe he had, and it simply did not register as important. I was not a person to be celebrated. I was the staff. I was the ghost who washed dishes while the real family discussed legacy. The invisible divide turned into a canyon during my junior year of high school. It was homecoming week. Garrett, then a senior, decided he needed a new look to impress the cheerleaders. I watched from the doorway of the master bedroom as Mom sat on the edge of the bed, checkbook open. Garrett held up a garment bag containing an Italian wool suit. $800, Susan? Dad raised an eyebrow, though he was already reaching for his wallet. He needs to look the part, Tom. It's an investment in his confidence. She swiped the credit card without blinking. $800 for a night of dancing and spiked punch. Later that same week, I approached Mom in the kitchen. I had been researching colleges, aiming for the Ivy League or the Air Force Academy. Mom, I asked, my voice small, I need to buy the advanced SAT prep books. The set is $50. Mom sighed, a long, dramatic exhalation that sucked the air out of the room. She looked at me with a pained expression as if I had just asked her to donate a kidney. Victoria, honestly, we're a little tight on cash right now. Can't you just borrow them from the library? Why are you always so demanding? You need to learn to be less selfish. Selfish? The word hung in the air. $800 for a suit Garrett would vomit on was an investment. $50 for my future was selfish. That afternoon, as Garrett drove off in Dad's brand new Ford Mustang to pick up his date, I put on my cousin's hand-me-down dress that was 2 sizes too big. I realized then that in the ledger of the Sterling family, Garrett was an asset and I was a liability. The final severance happened 3 years later. I came home, heart hammering against my ribs, clutching a thick envelope. I placed the acceptance letter to the Air Force Officer Candidate School on the coffee table. I got in. Dad glanced at it during a commercial break. Air Force, huh? Well, that's good. Saves me tuition money. He turned back to the screen. It suits you, Victoria. The military is structured. You don't need to worry about being overly feminine there. You just follow orders. No congratulations. No hug. No I'm proud of you. Just relief that I was off the payroll and a backhanded comment about my womanhood. When the day came to report to officer training, I packed my single duffel bag. I stood in the foyer, waiting. I can't drive you to the bus station, honey, Mom called out from upstairs. Garrett chipped a tooth opening a beer bottle. I have to get him to the dentist. And I have a tea time at 10, Dad added, checking his watch. You can call an Uber, right? You're independent. I took a Greyhound bus. As the heavy diesel engine roared to life and the bus pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window at the empty sidewalk. I realized I was not leaving my family because I never really had one. My suspicions did not start at the funeral. They started 3 years ago during a 96-hour Liberty Pass I took to visit Grandma Eleanor. As soon as I unlocked the front door of the ancestral home in La Jolla, the smell hit me. It was not the scent of lavender and baking bread I remembered from childhood. It was the heavy, cloying odor of wet drywall and mildew. I found Grandma sitting in her favorite armchair, a knitted blanket pulled up to her chin despite the mild California autumn. In the corner of the living room, a plastic Home Depot bucket sat on the Persian rug. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was rhythmic and maddening, like a slow ticking clock counting down the decay of the house. Grandma, I asked, my chest tightening, why is there a bucket in the living room? Why haven't you called a roofer? She smiled at me, but her eyes were cloudy, filled with a resignation that broke my heart. I told Garrett, sweetie, he handles the accounts now. He said the roof quotes are astronomical. He said the maintenance fund is running on fumes. He told me I just have to be patient and wait out one more rainy season. I looked at the water-stained ceiling, then at the bucket filled with murky brown water. Running on fumes. Grandma owned 9 rental properties in San Diego, one of the hottest real estate markets in the country. Those units had been fully occupied since the 1990s. The idea that there was not enough cash to fix a patch of roof was not just unlikely. It was mathematically impossible. That night, after Grandma took her medication and went to sleep, I did not go to bed. I went to the mahogany desk in the study and found the ledger. I am a logistics officer. My day job involves managing millions of dollars in military assets, tracking supply chains from factories in the Midwest to carrier strike groups in the Pacific. I know how to spot a discrepancy. In my world, if a single screw is missing, we stop the line until we find it. Garrett's bookkeeping was not just messy. It was a crime scene. There were no original receipts, only scribbled notes in the margins. I ran my finger down the columns. Plumbing repair, $3,500. Landscaping service, $2,600 per month. I snorted in the quiet room. $2,600 for what? The rental properties had gravel yards and succulents that required zero water. He was billing the estate for a landscaping crew that likely did not exist. The next morning, the sound of a V6 twin-turbo engine shattered the quiet of the neighborhood. I looked out the window to see Garrett pulling into the driveway. He was not driving his old sedan. He was behind the wheel of a brand-new Ford F-150 Raptor. The truck was a beast, painted a glossy code orange, sitting on 37-inch tires. Sticker price at least $78,000. He hopped out wearing Oakley sunglasses and holding a venti Starbucks cup. He looked like the picture of health and wealth, a stark contrast to the grandmother shivering inside her damp house. Hey, sis, home on the knee? I pointed at the truck. Nice ride, Garrett. Where did the money come from? Dad said you were between jobs. Garrett shrugged, taking a long sip of his $7 coffee. Crypto, Vic. You wouldn't understand. I made some smart moves with Bitcoin. Anyway, don't nag me about the roof. Materials are insane right now. Supply chain issues, you know. He used the buzzwords he heard on the news to cover his tracks. He lied to my face without blinking. He lied while standing 10 feet away from the woman who raised him. The woman who was currently catching rainwater in a plastic bucket, while he drove a tank that cost more than most people earn in a year. But I needed hard proof. I needed a smoking gun. I found it on page 47 of the ledger. HVAC replacement, Garnet Avenue property, $9,200. The date was from last month. I got in my car and drove straight to the rental on Garnet Avenue. It was a hot day, pushing 88 degrees. When the tenant, a guy named Mike, opened the door, a wave of heat hit me. He was sweating through his t-shirt. "New AC unit?" I asked. Skipping the pleasantries, Mike let out a bitter laugh. "Are you kidding me? The AC's been dead for 4 months. I've called Garrett a dozen times. He ghosted me. I'm literally drafting a lawsuit right now for breach of habitability. Mind if I see the unit?" He led me to the side yard. There it was, a rusted, rattling metal box. I checked the serial number plate. Manufactured in 1991. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the rusted unit. Then I took a photo of the serial number. Garrett had not spent $9,200 on a new air conditioner. He had pocketed the money, likely for a down payment on that orange truck, and left a paying tenant to roast in the heat and his grandmother to rot in the damp. This was not just incompetence. This was not just golden child syndrome. This was elder abuse. This was fraud. This was a felony. I drove back to Grandma's house that night through a torrential downpour. The thunder rattled the windows of my sedan like distant artillery fire, matching the storm brewing in my gut. I had the photos of the rusted air conditioner and the ledger pages tucked under my arm. When I entered the living room, Grandma was still in her chair, staring at the bucket of rainwater. I did not sugarcoat it. I laid the photos on the tea table, spreading them out like a winning poker hand. "He's robbing you, Grandma. Garrett is bleeding the estate dry. Here's the proof." Grandma Eleanor put on her reading glasses. Her hand shook as she picked up the photo of the 1990s HVAC unit. She did not gasp. She did not cry. She just sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of a decade of betrayal. "I know," she whispered, her voice raspy. I froze. "You know? Then why do you let him live like a king while you sit here in the damp?" She took off her glasses and looked at me, her eyes filled with a pain that had nothing to do with money. "Because your father, Richard, gave me an ultimatum. 3 years ago, when I first questioned Garrett's spending, Richard told me that if I made a scene, if I involved lawyers or the police, he would cut me off." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "He said he would make sure I never saw you again, Victoria. He said he would tell you I had gone senile and refused to let you visit. He held you hostage against my silence." The air left my lungs. My father had not just enabled Garrett. He had weaponized his relationship with me to blackmail his own mother. He had monetized his access to his daughter to protect his son's theft. That was the moment the last thread of loyalty I felt for Richard Sterling snapped. He was not my father anymore. He was a hostile combatant. Grandma Eleanor straightened her back. The frailty seemed to evaporate, replaced by the steel of the woman who had run a logistics empire in the 80s. "Victoria," she said, her voice dropping an octave, commanding and sharp, "I am not going to let my husband's legacy be picked apart by vultures. You are the only one in this family with discipline. You are the only one who knows the value of $1 because you actually work for yours." She pointed a bony finger at me. "I want to transfer everything, all of it, to you right now before I die." "Dad will kill me," I blurted out, the old fear rising up. She smiled, a cold, dry expression. "He won't be able to do a damn thing. Not if the paperwork is bulletproof. Do you have the courage to accept this mission, Major?" I looked at the bucket of water. I looked at her fierce eyes. "Yes, ma'am." Monday morning, 0800 hours. We initiated the operation. I called Dylan, my second cousin. He was a mechanic, a blue-collar guy who drove a beat-up Silverado and hated the pretension of my immediate family. He agreed to be our driver without asking questions. We loaded Grandma into Dylan's truck and drove downtown, parking in the alleyway behind the office of Davis and Associates. Mr. Davis was an old family friend, an estate attorney who knew where all the bodies were buried. We went in through the back door to avoid being seen by any of Dad's business cronies who might be lunching nearby. Mr. Davis had the documents ready on his mahogany desk. "This is a revocable living trust. It bypasses probate. It bypasses the will. It supersedes everything." He pointed to the specific clause. "Sole beneficiary, Victoria Eleanor Sterling, successor trustee, Victoria Eleanor Sterling." Then came the quitclaim deeds. 9 of them, one for each property. Grandma did not hesitate. She picked up the pen and began to sign. Scratch, scratch. The sound of the ink flowing onto the heavy legal bond paper was loud in the quiet office. To me, it sounded like the metallic click of a magazine being loaded into a rifle. With every signature, she was stripping Garrett of his power. With every stamp of the notary seal, she was reclaiming her dignity. Pacific Beach House. Signed, Garnet Avenue Rentals. Signed, Commercial Warehouse. When the last document was notarized, Grandma looked at me. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. Listen to me, Victoria. This is the most important part. Radio silence. Radio silence, I repeated. From now until the day I'm in the ground. And even after that, until the very moment they try to take it, you say nothing. You let Garrett drive that truck. You let Richard brag at the country club. You let them sleep soundly in their arrogance. Because when the enemy is comfortable, he is careless. I nodded, locking the strategy into my mind. Understood. I walked out of that office carrying a secret worth millions of dollars. I went back to my unit. I deployed overseas. And for 3 agonizing years, I watched from a distance. I watched Garrett drain the bank accounts. I watched my parents fawn over him. I watched them treat me like a nuisance. I endured every insult, every snub, every condescending remark about my government salary. I held my tongue because I knew something they did not. I knew that every dollar Garrett stole was just evidence building a case against him. I knew that the ground they were standing on did not belong to them anymore. It belonged to the ghost in the back of the room. The soil on Grandma Eleanor's grave was not even dry yet when the ambush happened. We had just returned from the cemetery. The black limousines were still idling in the driveway, and the guests were filtering into the living room for the wake. But before I could even take off my white gloves, my father gripped my elbow. His fingers dug into my arm with a force that was less like a hug and more like a handcuff. Study now, family meeting. I followed him into his home office. The room smelled of old leather and expensive cigar smoke, the scent of a club I was never allowed to join. Dad marched behind his massive oak desk and sat down, assuming the position of the judge. Mom sat in the guest chair, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. Garrett leaned against the bookshelf, crossing his ankles, looking like a tragic victim who had just been terribly inconvenienced by a death in the family. On the desk, sitting alone on the green blotter, was a single document. Dad did not waste time with pleasantries. He slid the paper toward me along with his heavy black resin Mont Blanc pen. Sign it, Victoria. I looked down. The title at the top read Disclaimer of Interest. What is this? It's a formality. It states that you voluntarily waive any claim to your grandmother's estate. It streamlines the transfer of assets to Garrett. We don't want to get courts and lawyers involved, do we? That gets messy. That gets expensive. We're a family. We handle things internally. They were not asking me, they were commanding me to rob myself. Before I could respond, Mom started her performance. She reached out and touched my hand, her face crumpling into a mask of maternal concern. Victoria, sweetheart, please look at your brother. She gestured to the 36-year-old man who was currently checking his text messages. Garrett needs stability. He's getting married to Madison. He needs to provide. You're gone all the time on your deployments. You aren't here to manage properties. She took a breath and then delivered the blow she had been saving for years. Besides, honey, you're a woman. Eventually, you'll get married, you'll change your name. The assets, they really should stay with the Sterling name. Garrett is the only son. He carries the legacy. You understand, don't you? It's just the natural order of things. My stomach turned. There it was. The sexism was not even subtle. In Diane Sterling's world, my biology rendered me incapable of stewardship. Because I did not have the right plumbing, I did not deserve the legacy. She was using my gender to validate her theft. Then Garrett pushed off the bookshelf and sauntered over. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing it in a way that felt patronizing. Come on, sis, don't be difficult. Sign the paper and I'll make it worth your while. Tell you what, once I sell the Pacific Beach House, I'll buy you that Hermes bag you see all the celebrities carrying. A Birkin, a Kelly, whatever you want. On me. I looked at him. He truly believed that my dignity could be bought with a purse. He thought I was a shallow child who could be distracted by a shiny object, while he stole millions of dollars in real estate. The silence in the room stretched thin like a rubber band about to snap. They were all looking at me. Dad with his authority, Mom with her guilt, Garrett with his bribe, waiting for me to submit, waiting for the good daughter to fold. I picked up the document. I felt the texture of the paper between my thumb and forefinger. Then I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. And finally, I looked at Garrett. My expression did not change. My pulse did not race. I was calm. I was deadly calm. You ask me who I am. I am a major in the United States Air Force. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I paused, letting the words hang there. And I've realized something today. Greed is an enemy. Manipulation is an enemy. I took the disclaimer of interest in both hands. Rip! The sound was loud, violent, and final. I tore the document in half, then in quarters. I let the pieces flutter down onto Dad's pristine desk like snow. I will not sign anything. And I don't want your handbag, Garrett. I want what is mine. You ungrateful little... Garrett started to lunge forward, his face turning red. I wouldn't do that, I warned, shifting my stance slightly. See you at the reading of the real will. I turned on my heel and walked out of the study, leaving the door wide open behind me. Behind me, I could hear the stunned silence turning into chaos, but I did not look back. The war had officially begun. For the 3 days leading up to the reading of the will, I did not sleep. I did not eat. I operated on black coffee and the cold-hard adrenaline of a mission commander preparing for a strike. My temporary apartment in downtown San Diego looked less like a home and more like a tactical operations center. My dining table was buried under stacks of paper, legal pads, and the glowing blue light of 2 laptop screens. I was not just waiting for the meeting, I was building a case. I logged into the San Diego County Assessor's public portal. It is a dry, boring database to most people, but to me, it was a goldmine. I downloaded the transaction history for every single property in the Sterling portfolio. Then I cross-referenced them with the bank statements I had subpoenaed through the Living Trust Authority. What I found made my jaw tighten. Garrett had not just been stealing cash for maintenance fraud. He had been trying to leverage the equity of the houses. There were 3 rejected loan applications from predatory lenders, the kind of places that charge 22% interest. Garrett had tried to use Grandma's Pacific Beach house as collateral for a quick cash infusion, likely to cover his crypto losses. But the banks had denied him. Why? Because when they ran the title search, the name on the deed did not match his. I printed every rejection letter. I printed the tax records showing penalties for late payments. Each piece of paper was a bullet. I did not just throw them in a pile. I organized them with the obsessive precision of a logistics officer. Yellow highlighter for fraud, pink highlighter for negligence, blue highlighter for tax evasion. I punched holes in the documents and slotted them into navy blue binders. Snap, snap. The sound of the metal rings closing was rhythmic, soothing. By Friday night, I did not have a pile of complaints. I had a weaponized dossier. I opened the Halliburton aluminum case, cold, heavy, indestructible, and placed the 9 blue binders inside, nestling them next to the original trust documents. Click, click. The sound of the latches locking echoed in the empty apartment like the racking of a shotgun slide. I checked my watch. Time to go. I picked up the case, walked out the door, and did not look back. The silence was over. The hunter was coming home. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I drove to the Sterling Property Management office at 0700, 30 minutes before the deadline I had given Garrett. I did not come alone. Deputy Sheriff Martinez sat in the passenger seat of my rental sedan, clipboard resting on his lap, watching the building with the practiced patience of someone who had overseen 100 evictions. The office occupied the ground floor of a commercial building on Kettner Boulevard, sandwiched between a yoga studio and an artisanal coffee shop. Grandma Eleanor had run her empire from this modest space for 40 years. The brass nameplate beside the door still read, Sterling Properties Est, 1965. Through the plate glass window I could see movement. Garrett was inside, frantically shoving papers into a cardboard box. His shirt was untucked, hair uncombed, the polished veneer from the funeral completely stripped away. When he looked up and saw me standing on the sidewalk with a sheriff's deputy, something in his face collapsed. The door was locked. I checked my watch. 7:29, 1 minute until deadline. At precisely 7:30, I knocked. 3 sharp raps. Garrett yanked the door open, eyes bloodshot, breath sour with last night's whiskey. You can't do this. I built this business. Mom and Dad will fight you on this. His voice cracked on the last word, desperation leaking through the bravado. The business was built by Eleanor Sterling over 5 decades. You've managed it for 3 years and nearly destroyed it. Deputy Martinez, please ensure Mr. Sterling only removes personal items. No hard drives, no files, no company documents. Martinez stepped past me, hand resting casually on his belt near his radio. Garrett backed into the office, hands raised in a gesture of futile protest. I was trying to format the drive, trying to erase evidence. I walked to the desktop computer and unplugged the tower from the wall mid-boot. Don't bother. I cloned the drive remotely on Saturday night. Every deleted email, every altered spreadsheet. It's already on a server in the cloud. The FBI has a copy. The IRS has a copy. Garrett slumped into his chair, box of belongings forgotten. For a moment, he looked like the older brother I vaguely remembered from childhood. The one who let me ride on his shoulders at the beach before the entitlement calcified into his bones. Then the moment passed. Outside, the metallic clank of a tow truck's hydraulics announced its arrival. I walked to the window. A repo man was backing his flatbed toward Garrett's orange Raptor, parked at the curb like a monument to his theft. That's mine, I paid for that. My voice was surgical, precise. You paid with money embezzled from an 85-year-old woman. The bank hasn't received a payment in 4 months. It's not yours. It never was. The tow truck's wheel lift engaged with a mechanical whine. The Raptor's front tires lifted off the asphalt, back end dragging. Garrett pressed his hands against the glass, watching $78,000 of fraudulently acquired machinery get hauled away. The code orange paint gleamed in the morning sun one last time before the truck turned the corner and disappeared. My phone vibrated. A text from Madison, Garrett's fiancée, though the message was clearly meant for everyone to see, given the multiple recipients. Just found out the engagement ring is fake. Cubic zirconia. I'm done. Do not contact me. Garrett's phone buzzed simultaneously. He looked at the screen, face draining of color. Then he did something I did not anticipate. He started laughing. Not the manic cackle of a breakdown, but the hollow sound of someone who has finally understood the totality of his loss. Madison had the ring appraised. She was planning to sell it after the wedding. Guess that plan's shot. He tossed his phone onto the desk, screen cracking against the wood. You've thought of everything, haven't you, Vic? You always were the smart one, the disciplined one, the one who earned everything. And look where it got you. Standing here at 32, alone, destroying your own family. I turned from the window, meeting his eyes for the first time since entering. I'm not destroying anything, I'm revealing what was already rotten. There's a difference. Garrett grabbed the cardboard box, now containing a coffee mug, a desk calendar, and a bobblehead doll from some forgotten promotion. As he walked past me toward the door, he stopped. His shoulder nearly touched mine. Dad's not gonna let this go. You know that, right? He'll burn every bridge, spend every last dollar to protect me. That's what fathers do for their sons. The implication hung in the air between us, sharp and cold. That's what fathers do for their sons, not their daughters. He left without another word, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. Deputy Martinez emerged from the back office. All clear. No files removed, no equipment damaged. You want me to stay while you secure the premises? I shook my head. I'll be fine. Thank you, Deputy. After Martinez left, I stood alone in the office that now legally belonged to me. The silence was profound. I walked to the desk where Garrett had sat, opened the top drawer, and found exactly what I expected. Betting slips from Del Mar Racetrack, printed screenshots of crypto portfolio losses totaling $47,000, a letter from Madison's wedding planner estimating total ceremony costs at $85,000. He had been hemorrhaging money faster than he could steal it. The embezzlement was not greed. It was desperation compounding itself, each theft funding the next attempt to look wealthy, to look successful, to look like the heir everyone told him he was supposed to be. I photographed everything, added it to the evidence file. Then I sat down at the computer I had unplugged and began the real work of understanding just how deep the rot went. Sarah Rodriguez arrived at 9 o'clock, knocking softly before entering. She was my grandmother's accountant for 30 years, a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair and glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. She carried a leather briefcase that looked older than I was. Major Sterling, I'm glad you called. She sat across from me, opened the briefcase, and pulled out a ledger that was not part of the official records. Your grandmother asked me to keep a secondary set of books 3 years ago. She knew something was wrong but couldn't prove it. She had me track every discrepancy, every suspicious transaction. This is what I found. Sarah spread documents across the desk. Bank statements showing wire transfers to offshore accounts. Invoices for work never performed. A pattern of systematic looting that went far beyond what I had discovered in my initial audit. The total? Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she pointed to the bottom line. $2.4 million over 36 months. Your grandmother's estate should be worth $14 million. Instead, it's worth $11.6 million. The difference is where Garrett spent it. I leaned back in the chair processing the numbers. $2.4 million. That was not petty theft. That was organized financial crime. Why didn't you go to the police? Sarah removed her glasses, cleaning them with a cloth from her pocket. Eleanor made me promise not to. She said if I did, Richard would make sure she never saw you again. She was protecting you, Victoria. Even while she was being robbed blind, she was protecting you. The words hit harder than I expected. I had spent 3 years believing my silence was strategic, that I was playing the long game. But Grandma had been playing it longer, enduring theft to preserve the one relationship that mattered to her. Sarah slid a manila folder across the desk. There's something else. 6 months before she died, Eleanor came to my office. She was agitated, kept looking over her shoulder, like she thought someone followed her. She gave me this and made me swear on my children's lives that I would only give it to you, and only after she was gone. I opened the folder. Inside was a handwritten letter on my grandmother's personal stationery. The paper thin and elegant, her cursive script precise despite her age. My dearest Victoria, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you have begun the fight. I did not have the strength to finish. I need you to know something that I could never say while I lived, trapped as I was by Richard's threats. Your father knew. He knew everything Garrett was doing. He knew because he helped plan it. The rest of the letter detailed a conversation Eleanor had overheard 18 months ago. Richard and Garrett in the study, door slightly ajar, voices lowered, but not low enough. They had discussed how to structure the thefts to avoid detection, how to forge her signature on financial documents, how to gradually drain accounts in amounts small enough that she might not notice as her mental acuity declined with age. Richard had not simply enabled Garrett's theft, he had architected it. I read the letter 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of premeditation. This was not a father protecting a troubled son. This was conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, with my grandmother as the victim and my father as co-conspirator. Sarah watched me process the information, giving me space to absorb the full weight of betrayal. What do you need from me? I folded the letter carefully, returning it to the folder. Copies of everything. The secondary books, the bank records, every piece of evidence you've collected. And I need you to be willing to testify if this goes to trial. Sarah's face hardened with something that looked like relief. I've been waiting 3 years to say yes to that question. That evening, I met Marcus Chen at a quiet bar near the waterfront. Marcus and I graduated from the Air Force Academy together, both of us in the top 10% of our class. While I went into logistics, he pursued law, eventually becoming a judge advocate general officer, specializing in military justice. Last year, he had transitioned to civilian practice, focusing on white-collar crime and estate litigation. He sat in the corner booth when I arrived, already nursing a scotch, still wearing his suit from whatever courthouse appearance had occupied his afternoon. When he saw me, he stood, and we embraced briefly, the kind of hug reserved for people who have been through survival training together. You look like hell, Vic. Vic. I slid into the booth opposite him. I feel like I've been fighting a war on my own soil. Marcus pushed a second glass toward me, amber liquid catching the low light. That's because you have been. I reviewed the documents you sent. This isn't just a state drama. This is a federal case. Wire fraud, elder abuse, tax evasion, forgery. If the U.S. attorney wants to prosecute, your father and brother are looking at 7 to 15 years. The bartender brought a bowl of mixed nuts. I picked at them, not hungry, but needing something to do with my hands. I don't want them in prison, I just want them to stop. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice dropping to the confidential tone he used when delivering difficult tactical advice. Then we need to structure this as a choice. They can either face criminal prosecution, or they can agree to a settlement that strips them of any future claims to your grandmother's estate. We give them an out, but it costs them everything. What about my mother, Diane? From what you've told me, she's complicit through willful ignorance. She knew enough to be uncomfortable, but not enough to be criminally liable. She's a witness, not a defendant. I took a sip of the scotch. It burned going down, sharp and clarifying. And Natalie, your younger sister? Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through notes. She's been in Portland for 5 years, no involvement in the family business, no financial transactions with the estate. She's clean. Have you talked to her since the funeral? I shook my head. Natalie and I had a complicated relationship. Or more accurately, we had no relationship. She was 5 years younger, the artistic middle child who floated through life sketching and painting, while Garrett and I fought the war for parental attention. She had escaped to art school, then to Portland, and rarely came home. You should call her. Marcus finished his scotch. Family fractures like this, people take sides. Better that she hears your version before Richard spins his. That night, back in my apartment, I stared at my phone for 20 minutes before dialing Natalie's number. It rang 4 times before she answered, voice sleepy and confused. Vic, it's almost midnight. What's wrong? I need to tell you something. About Grandma Eleanor, about Garrett and Dad, about why I did what I did at the funeral. There was a long pause, then the sound of movement, blankets rustling. I figured you'd call eventually. Hold on, let me get some coffee. I heard water running, the click of a kettle. Then Natalie was back, more alert. Mom called me yesterday. She said you're trying to destroy the family. She said you manipulated Grandma into changing her will while she was senile. She said Dad's talking to lawyers about contesting everything. Of course she did. I spent the next 40 minutes walking Natalie through the evidence, the forged signatures, the embezzled funds, the letter from Grandma, the offshore accounts. I did not editorialize. I simply presented facts, letting the chronology speak for itself. When I finished, Natalie was silent for a long time. Why didn't anyone tell me? Her voice was small, young, the way it sounded when she was 12, and asking why she could not come to my high school graduation because Garrett had a baseball tournament the same day. Because you got out. You built a life that didn't revolve around their approval. And honestly, I think Grandma wanted to protect you. You were the only one who escaped with your soul intact. More silence, then a deep breath. I believe you. I don't want to, because believing you means accepting that Dad helped Garrett steal from his own mother. But I believe you. Relief flooded through me, unexpected in its intensity. Thank you. What do you need from me? Just be ready. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Dad's not going to surrender quietly. Natalie laughed, sharp and bitter. Dad never does anything quietly. When are you going to drop the hammer? 2 weeks. Marcus is preparing the settlement offer. They'll have 72 hours to accept or we file criminal charges. I'm coming home. I can't let you fight this alone. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Natalie's voice was firm now, the steel core beneath the artist exterior. You've been fighting alone your whole life, Vic. That stops now. After we hung up, I sat in the dark apartment, feeling something shift. I had spent 32 years as the sole sterling child who earned rather than expected. The one who stood alone, because alone was safer than vulnerable. But Natalie's words echoed in the silence. That stops now. The next morning, I received a certified letter at my temporary address. Inside was a formal legal notice from Blackwood & Associates, a white shoe law firm in La Jolla. Richard had hired them to contest Eleanor's trust on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. The letter was 12 pages of legal boilerplate, but the core argument was simple. I had manipulated a senile old woman into disinheriting her son and grandson. They were seeking to void the trust, restore the previous will, and have me investigated for elder abuse. I called Marcus immediately. They're going nuclear. Marcus's voice was calm, almost amused. Of course they are. This is the play I expected. They're hoping to intimidate you into settling on their terms. How much are they asking for? The letter demands that I voluntarily disclaim my interest in the estate, pay for Garrett's legal defense, and issue a public apology to the family. Marcus laughed outright. The audacity is almost impressive. Okay, here's what we do. We respond with our own motion. We present every piece of evidence Sarah collected, every forged signature, every embezzled dollar. We make it so radioactive that no judge will touch their case without hazmat gloves. How long? Give me 72 hours. I'll have a filing ready that makes the DA's office look like the logical next step if they don't withdraw. That same afternoon, I drove to La Jolla, to the house where I grew up. The Spanish colonial on Prospect Street, where family dinners happened in silence, and love was measured in tuition checks that never came. I did not call ahead. I simply parked at the curb and walked to the door. My mother answered, still wearing her gardening gloves, soil smudged on her cheek. When she saw me, her face crumpled. Victoria, oh, honey, please, can we talk? Really talk? I stepped inside. The house smelled the same, lemon pledge and fresh flowers from the arrangements Mom refreshed weekly. We sat in the living room where I had opened college rejection letters, while Garrett celebrated his acceptance to state school with a backyard party. Mom twisted the gardening gloves in her lap. Your father is... He's not handling this well. The lawyers are costing us $5,000 a week. He took out a home equity line to pay them. I don't know what to do. You could tell him to stop. Diane looked up, eyes a bit red-rimmed. He's my husband. Garrett is my son. How can I not support them? By admitting they're wrong. By acknowledging that stealing from Grandma Eleanor was unconscionable. By choosing truth over comfort. Mom stood abruptly, walking to the window overlooking the garden she tended with more attention than she ever gave her children. You don't understand what it's like being married for 40 years, building a life. I can't just throw that away because Garrett made some mistakes. Mistakes. The word landed like a slap. Garrett didn't make mistakes. He committed crimes. Dad helped him. And you enabled both of them by pretending not to see. I stood preparing to leave. Mom turned back to me, face hardening into something I had seen 1,000 times. The expression she wore when explaining why Garrett's needs always superseded mine. You know what you are, Victoria? You're selfish. You always have been. You got into the academy on your own, made a career on your own, never needed us. So now you're punishing us for not giving you something you never wanted in the first place. The accusation was so absurd, I almost laughed. I never wanted your money. I wanted your respect. I wanted you to see me as something other than the daughter who was too strong to need love. But you're right about one thing. I don't need you. I never did. And that's what terrifies you most. I walked out, leaving her standing in the perfect living room of the perfect house, surrounded by the perfect life she had built by ignoring every inconvenient truth that threatened its foundation. That night, Marcus sent me a draft of our response. It was 38 pages of meticulously documented fraud, complete with forensic accounting, handwriting analysis of forged signatures, and witness statements from Sarah Rodriguez. The final page contained a settlement offer. Garrett and Richard would sign a comprehensive release of all claims to Eleanor's estate, submit to a financial audit, and agree never to contest the trust again. In exchange, I would not pursue criminal charges. The deadline, 72 hours. I approved it without revision. Marcus filed the next morning. 48 hours later, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I answered out of habit. Victoria Sterling? This is William Blackwood of Blackwood & Associates. I represent your father and brother. His voice was cultured, expensive, the kind that charges $800 an hour to sound reasonable. I'm listening. My clients would like to meet, face to face, no lawyers, no recordings, just family. I checked my watch. The 72-hour deadline was 19 hours away. When and where? Tomorrow, 10 a.m., your grandmother's office on Kettner Boulevard. I felt the trap closing. The obvious setup for some emotional ambush where Richard would try to weaponize nostalgia and guilt. But I also knew that avoiding the meeting would be seen as weakness. I'll be there. But Marcus Chen comes with me, non-negotiable. Blackwood paused, consulting with someone in the background. Agreed. 10 a.m. sharp. I hung up and immediately called Marcus. They want a meeting tomorrow morning. I think they're going to try one last manipulation. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Or they're going to fold. Richard's a businessman. He knows when he's beat. My guess? They're going to try to negotiate better terms. What should I ask for? Nothing. You hold the line exactly where it is. They sign the release or face prosecution. No middle ground. The next morning arrived cold and overcast, marine layer thick enough to blur the distinction between sea and sky. I dressed in my service uniform, every button polished, every crease sharp. If this was going to be theater, I would look like the officer who swore an oath to defend against enemies both foreign and domestic. Marcus met me in the parking lot. He wore a charcoal suit, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Remember, we don't negotiate from our position. They come to us. We entered the office together. Richard sat behind the desk, Garrett in the chair beside him, Diane standing near the window. William Blackwood occupied the other visitor chair, an iPad open on his lap. The energy in the room was funeral, grief and rage competing for dominance. Richard looked older. The past 2 weeks had carved new lines around his mouth, gray spreading through his hair like frost. When he saw me in uniform, something flickered in his eyes. Pride? Regret? I could not tell. Victoria, thank you for coming. His voice was measured, careful, the tone he used in business negotiations. I remained standing near the door, Marcus beside me. Your lawyer said you wanted to talk, so talk. Richard stood, hands flat on the desk, the posture of a man trying to reclaim authority in a room where he no longer had any. This has gone far enough. We're family. We should be able to resolve this without destroying each other. I'm not destroying anyone. I'm enforcing a legal contract executed by Eleanor Sterling of sound mind. If you feel destroyed by that, perhaps you should examine why. Garrett made a noise, half laugh, half sob. Sound mind? She was 85. She forgot names. She left the stove on. She never forgot a number. Never missed a property tax deadline. Never failed to notice that you were stealing from her. Her memory was selective, Garrett, and it selected the things that mattered. Blackwood cleared his throat, the sound of an expensive mediator trying to redirect. Perhaps we can discuss the settlement terms. My clients are willing to accept the validity of the trust, but they feel the complete exclusion from the estate is punitive, given their decades of family history. Marcus did not sit. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and placed it on the desk in front of Blackwood. This is a summary of the criminal liability we've identified. 14 counts of wire fraud, 8 counts of forgery, 6 counts of elder financial abuse, 2 counts of tax evasion. The U.S. Attorney is waiting for our signal to open an investigation. Your clients can sign the settlement as written, or they can spend the next decade in federal court. The room went silent. Diane started crying quietly, a sound like wind through dead leaves. Garrett stared at the document, face bloodless. Richard just sat down slowly, the fight draining out of him. You would really do this? Send your own father to prison? His question was genuine, as if the possibility had never occurred to him. If you force me to choose between protecting you and honoring Grandma Eleanor's final wishes? Yes, without hesitation. Richard looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the moment he understood that I was not the daughter who could be guilted into submission. I was the officer who had spent 10 years learning that discipline equals freedom, and the only prison that mattered was the one you built with your own compromises. Blackwood stood. I need to confer with my clients privately. Marcus nodded. You have until 5 p.m. today to sign the settlement. After that, the offer expires and we proceed to criminal referral. We left them in the office, 3 people trapped in the consequences of choices they thought they could escape. Outside, the marine layer was beginning to burn off, blue sky appearing in patches overhead. Marcus checked his phone. Either they sign by end of day or this becomes a federal case. My money's on them signing. What if they don't? Then you'll have done everything possible to give them a way out. What happens after that is on them. At 4:47 p.m., my phone dinged with an email. Attached was a PDF of the settlement agreement, signed by Richard Sterling and Garrett Sterling. The electronic signature timestamp showed 4:45 p.m. They had waited until the last moment, perhaps hoping I would blink first. But I had learned something in the military that they never understood. The person willing to walk away from the table has all the power. And I had been walking away from their table my entire life. 6 months after the settlement was signed, I stood in the Sterling Properties office at dawn, watching the sun break over the harbor. In architecture, there is a technique called adaptive reuse, transforming derelict buildings into livable spaces. You do not demolish the foundation. You respect the bones, preserve what remains sound, and rebuild what has rotted. That is precisely what I was doing with my 32 years of existence. The first thing I did was fire everyone, not out of spite, but necessity. Garrett had hired friends, cousins, drinking buddies, people who owed him favors or feared his retaliation. They were not property managers. They were accomplices to mediocrity. I interviewed replacements myself, sitting across from candidates in the same chair where my grandmother once conducted business. The questions were simple. What is your maintenance response time? How do you handle tenant complaints? Have you ever falsified a repair invoice? The last question made several applicants uncomfortable. Good. If discomfort around basic ethics bothered them, they had no place in my organization. By week 3, I had assembled a team of 5. 2 maintenance technicians, both veterans who understood the concept of service-level agreements. 1 property manager, with 15 years of experience in commercial real estate. 1 bookkeeper who had worked for a forensic accounting firm. And Sarah Rodriguez, who I promoted to Chief Financial Officer. Sarah sat across from me on her first day in the new role, reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewing the mess Garrett had left behind. We have 16 outstanding lawsuits from tenants. Most are for habitability violations. Broken HVAC, leaking roofs, mold remediation that was never performed. How much to settle all of them fairly? Sarah did not hesitate. $85,000, maybe $90,000 if they have aggressive lawyers. Do it, every single one, and make sure the repairs are completed before settlement checks clear. Sarah looked up, surprise flickering across her face. You're going to pay them and fix the problems? Grandma built this business on reputation. Garrett destroyed it through neglect. We rebuild it through competence. No one gets to say Sterling Properties treats tenants like revenue streams instead of human beings. Within 6 weeks, every lawsuit was settled. Every repair was completed. The Garnet Avenue property got a new HVAC system, this one actually installed instead of embezzled. The Pacific Beach House got a new roof, the one Grandma should have received 3 years ago. The tenants noticed. Mrs. Chen, who rented a small studio on Kettner, stopped me one morning as I was inspecting the building. You're Eleanor's granddaughter? The one who was in the Air Force? I nodded. I just wanted to say thank you. My shower has been broken for 6 months. Your brother kept promising to fix it. Yesterday, someone came and replaced the entire unit. It's beautiful. She pressed a small tin into my hands. Homemade almond cookies. Your grandmother was a good woman. I think you are too. The tin sat on my desk for the rest of the day. A reminder that kindness and competence were not mutually exclusive. They were partners. The financial turnaround was swift. Without Garrett's theft and incompetence bleeding revenue, the properties generated profit immediately. By month 4, Sterling Properties showed a net gain of $73,000. By month 6, that number had grown to $112,000. I did not raise rent. I simply stopped funding someone else's gambling addiction. But running the business was the easy part. The hard part was learning to be someone other than Major Victoria Sterling, the woman who had spent a decade defined by rank and regulation. That is how I ended up in Thomas Chen's office at the University of San Diego on a Thursday afternoon. Thomas was an associate professor of architecture, someone who had graduated from the Air Force Academy 2 years ahead of me before choosing graduate school over active duty. We had not been close at the academy, but we had been friendly, the kind of acquaintances who nodded in hallways and shared notes before exams. I had called him 3 days earlier, explaining that I needed to learn modern architectural software for property development. He had laughed, a warm sound that carried genuine amusement rather than mockery. You want me to teach you AutoCAD? Vic, you're a logistics officer. You already know how to read blueprints. Reading is not creating. I need to understand how buildings are designed, not just how supplies are delivered to them. There was a pause, and I could hear him processing the request. Okay, come to my office Thursday at 4. Bring a laptop and low expectations. His office was exactly what I expected. Cluttered with architectural models, walls covered in student sketches, a drafting table buried under books and coffee mugs. Thomas sat at his desk, wearing jeans and a university hoodie, looking nothing like the cadet I vaguely remembered. Major Sterling. He stood, extending his hand. Though I guess it's just Victoria now? Just Vic. I separated from active duty last month. His handshake was firm, brief, professional. Okay, Vic. Let's see what you remember from your engineering coursework. He pulled up a chair beside his computer, opening AutoCAD. For the next 2 hours, he walked me through the basics. Layers, dimensions, scale, viewports. His teaching style was patient but demanding, correcting mistakes immediately, never accepting sloppy work. This line is 3/16 of an inch off. In a digital model, close enough is not good enough. You teach your hand to be precise or you teach it to be lazy. There is no middle ground. I redrew the line, then again, until it measured exactly right. By the end of the session, I had created a basic floor plan of a single-room structure. It was crude, elementary, the kind of thing first-year students would mock, but it was mine. Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying the screen. Not bad for someone who hasn't drawn anything since freshman year. Why are you really doing this? I closed the laptop, considering how much to share, because I spent 10 years in logistics, managing other people's designs, other people's visions. I want to understand what it feels like to create something from nothing, instead of just optimizing what already exists. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding more than I had said. Come back next Thursday, same time. We'll move into three-dimensional modeling. Over the following months, Thursday afternoons became a ritual. Thomas taught me AutoCAD, Revit, SketchUp, the digital tools that had replaced the drafting tables and vellum my grandmother once used. But more than software, he taught me how to see space differently. Buildings are not just walls and roofs. They're volumes of air shaped by intention. When you design a room, you're designing how someone will feel when they stand in it. Will they feel trapped or liberated, inspired or diminished? We were standing in an empty property I owned on Market Street, scheduled for renovation. Thomas walked the perimeter, hands in pockets, eyes tracking the ceiling height, the window placement, the flow of natural light. What do you see when you look at this space, Vic? I see 4,000 square feet of commercial real estate with good bones but terrible layout. The office spaces are too small. The break room is poorly positioned. The electrical needs a complete overhaul. Thomas smiled. That's what a logistics officer sees. Now look at it like an architect. What does this space want to become? I closed my eyes, trying to shift perspective. When I opened them, I saw something different. The high ceilings could create a sense of openness. The windows faced south, meaning abundant natural light. The exposed brick on one wall had character, history, texture. It wants to be a shared workspace. Not cubicles, but open tables where people can collaborate. The break room becomes a coffee bar. The small offices become private phone booths for calls. Thomas's smile widened. Now you're seeing it. You're not just managing the building. You're creating an experience. That conversation stayed with me. For 32 years, I had been taught to optimize, to make existing systems more efficient. But efficiency was not the same as vision. One improved what was. The other imagined what could be. On a Tuesday morning in March, 17 months after Grandma Eleanor's funeral, Garrett appeared at the office. I was reviewing lease agreements when Sarah knocked on my door. Your brother is here. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. I closed the file slowly, considering whether to have him removed. But curiosity won over caution. Send him in. Garrett entered, looking diminished. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by khakis and a polo shirt from Target. He had lost weight, face gaunt, eyes carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had been forced to confront reality for the first time in his life. He stood near the door, not sitting until I gestured to the chair. Thank you for seeing me. His voice was quiet, stripped of the bravado I remembered. What do you want, Garrett? I wanted to apologize for everything, for stealing from Grandma, for being an entitled piece of shit, for making your life miserable. I waited. Apologies without action were just words arranged prettily. I'm working now. Construction, swinging a hammer, carrying lumber. $47,000 a year, no company truck, no expense account, just hourly wages. He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred from manual labor. Madison's gone. Married some tech guy in Silicon Valley 3 months after she left me. Dad's not speaking to me, says I humiliated him by losing everything. The irony seemed lost on him. He had not lost everything. He had been prevented from stealing everything. Why are you telling me this? Because I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what it feels like to work for something, to earn respect instead of expecting it, to be judged by what you do, not who your father is. I studied my brother across the desk. He looked sincere. He probably was sincere. But sincerity without change was just regret with better packaging. Garrett, do you know why I didn't have you prosecuted? He shook his head. Because Grandma made me promise that I would give you a chance to grow up, not rescue you, not enable you, but give you the opportunity to learn what consequences feel like. This is your chance. What you do with it determines whether you're actually sorry or just sorry you got caught. His eyes welled up, tears threatening to spill. Do you still consider me your brother? The question hung in the air, weighted with 34 years of history. The brother who got the praise I earned. The brother who received the money I was denied. The brother whose existence was a constant reminder that I would never be enough in our parents' eyes. But also the brother who let me ride on his shoulders at the beach when I was 5. The brother who punched Derek Morrison in 8th grade for calling me a dyke. The brother who existed before the entitlement calcified into something toxic. You'll always be my brother. But you're not my family. Not yet. Family is earned through showing up, through choosing someone even when it's hard, through loving someone for who they are instead of what they can provide. You never did that for me. So now the question is whether you're capable of learning how. Garrett stood slowly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I'll try. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'll try. He left without asking for money, without requesting favors, without any of the manipulation that had characterized our entire relationship. It was a start, not redemption, not reconciliation, but a start. 2 weeks later, a manila envelope arrived at the office via certified mail. The return address was First National Bank Trust Department. Inside was a letter on official bank stationery. Dear Major Sterling, this correspondence is being sent in accordance with instructions left by Eleanor Frances Sterling. We were directed to hold this letter for 18 months following Mrs. Sterling's death and deliver it only if you were listed as the primary beneficiary of her estate. As those conditions have been met, we are forwarding the enclosed materials. Beneath the cover letter was a second envelope, sealed with red wax bearing my grandmother's initials. My hand shook as I broke the seal. My dearest Victoria, if you are reading this, you have fought the battle. I did not have the strength to finish. You have faced your father and brother and survived. I am so proud of you, though I wish I could say it to your face rather than through paper and ink. There are things I need you to know. First, in the safe deposit box at this bank, box number 4713, you will find a third will. This one was written 1 week before I died. In it, I leave 50% of my estate to you, 30% to Natalie, and 20% to Garrett, but only if he can prove himself worthy through 2 years of honest employment and 0 contact with your father regarding inheritance. Second, I purchased a life insurance policy 6 years ago when I first suspected Richard and Garrett were planning something. The policy is for $1.2 million. The sole beneficiary is you. Your father never knew it existed. Third, and most important, you are the best architect I never saw practice. I watched you draw buildings in the margins of your homework. I saw the way you looked at structures, analyzing not just what they were, but what they could become. You gave up that dream because you believed the military was the only place you could earn respect. But now you have money, time, and freedom. Don't waste your second act living someone else's vision. I have enclosed the key to the safe deposit box. The password is your commissioning date. Use these resources to build the life you always deserved. With all my love, Eleanor. I sat at the desk for a long time, holding the letter, letting the weight of her final gift settle over me. She had not just left me money. She had left me permission to become someone other than the soldier who survived by never needing anyone. The next day I went to First National Bank. The safe deposit box contained exactly what the letter promised. The third will, properly executed and notarized. A life insurance policy worth $1.2 million. And a small velvet box. Inside the box was a ring. Not valuable, just a simple band with an inscription. Build something beautiful. I slipped it onto my right hand. It fit perfectly. Marcus Chen sat across from me in a conference room at his law firm, reviewing the third will with the methodical precision of someone who had seen enough estate litigation to trust nothing at face value. This changes everything. The third will supersedes the previous two. It means Natalie is entitled to 30% of the estate, and Garrett has a conditional claim to 20%. I had already calculated the numbers. 30% of 11.6 million was 3.48 million. 20% was 2.32 million. If I honored this will, I would retain only 5.8 million, plus the life insurance. Do I have to honor it? Marcus looked up from the document. Legally? No. The trust you hold is irrevocable. But morally, that's between you and your grandmother's memory. I walked to the window overlooking the harbor. Sailboats drifted across the bay, white triangles against blue water. Grandma could have updated the trust. She could have changed beneficiaries at any time, but she left this will in a time-locked envelope, ensuring I would only find it after I had fought and won. She wanted me to choose generosity from a position of strength, rather than have it imposed through legal obligation. I'm going to honor it. Natalie gets her 30%. Garrett gets his 20% if he meets the conditions. Marcus made a note on his legal pad. And if Garrett doesn't meet the conditions, then his portion reverts to me. But I'm betting he will. He looked different when he came to the office. Beaten down but not broken. Sometimes that's when real growth starts. The implementation took 3 months. Natalie flew in from Portland, stunned when I explained the third will. Vic, I don't need $3.5 million. My entire life costs like $30,000 a year. I know. But Grandma wanted you to have it. Maybe she knew you'd use it to fund your art without starving. Maybe she wanted you to have the freedom to say no to commercial work you hate. Either way, it's yours. Natalie hugged me, the first physical affection we had shared in years. I'm going to put half of it in a foundation for art scholarships for military kids. Name it after Grandma. The Eleanor Sterling Creative Arts Fund. I like it. Garrett's situation was more complex. Marcus drafted the conditions explicitly. 2 consecutive years of employment at any legitimate company, earning at least $40,000 annually. 0 financial requests from or coordination with Richard Sterling. Completion of a financial literacy course. And a written essay explaining what he learned from his mistakes. I called Garrett to explain. An essay? Vic, I'm 36, not in high school. Then it should be easy. 500 words minimum, due in 18 months when your employment requirement is met. No word limit maximum if you have more to say. There was silence on the line. Okay, I'll do it. 10 months after that conversation, I stood in an empty townhouse in North Park, a neighborhood east of downtown that was gentrifying rapidly. The space was 2 bedrooms, 1,500 square feet, nothing like the sprawling properties I now owned. But it had something the Sterling Mansion in La Jolla never had. It was mine without qualification or compromise. Thomas Chen walked through with me, professional curiosity blending with personal interest. You're really giving up the Pacific Beach house? I sold it last week. $8.3 million. The buyer is a tech entrepreneur who wants to turn it into a wellness retreat center. And you're moving here? Thomas gestured at the modest townhouse. I don't need 8,000 square feet. I need a home office with good light and a kitchen where I can cook for 1 person without feeling like I'm rattling around in a museum. What about the other bedroom? Studio. I'm going to put a drafting table, a 3D printer, a proper workstation. I walked to the window overlooking a small shared courtyard. This is the right size for a life I'm building instead of a life I inherited. Thomas stood beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something cedar and understated. You know what I see when I look at you now? Not the logistics officer, not the heir, just someone learning how to design her own space. What kind of space am I designing? One where you get to decide who walks through the door. The moment stretched between us, something unspoken but acknowledged. Then Thomas checked his watch. I have a faculty meeting, but I'm teaching an evening workshop next month on sustainable urban design. Guest speakers welcome if you're interested. I'd like that. After he left, I stood alone in the empty townhouse. Sunlight streamed through west-facing windows, painting the hardwood floor gold. This space held no memories of disappointment, no ghosts of conditional love. It was blank canvas. I could become anyone here. The Sterling Properties office moved to a smaller location on 6th Avenue. Better foot traffic, lower rent, right size for a team of 5. I kept the name not out of sentimentality but practicality. 40 years of reputation had value, even if 36 months of it had been tarnished. The Market Street property became the shared workspace I envisioned: open tables, coffee bar, phone booths for private calls. We leased it to freelancers, remote workers, and small businesses who could not afford traditional office space. By month 3, it was 90% occupied. The revenue was not exceptional, but it was honest. Every dollar could be traced to value provided rather than corners cut. I established the Eleanor Sterling Housing Initiative, a nonprofit that provided below-market rent to tenants who had been priced out of San Diego's brutal real estate market. Teachers, nurses, firefighters, people whose work held society together, but whose salaries had not kept pace with housing costs. The program was not charity. Tenants paid rent, just at rates tied to their income rather than market speculation. In exchange, they agreed to maintain the property, build community, look after neighbors. Sarah thought I was insane. You're leaving money on the table. These units could rent for 3 times what you're charging. I know. But Grandma built this business on handshake deals and fair treatment. I'm not going to extract maximum value from people who teach my hypothetical children or save my hypothetical life. That's not optimization. That's parasitism. Sarah smiled, the expression of someone who had waited 30 years to see Sterling Properties return to its roots. Eleanor would be proud. 22 months after the funeral, I received an envelope from Garrett. Inside was his essay, 5 pages, single-spaced. He wrote about entitlement, the poison of being told you are special without earning it, about watching me leave for the academy while he stayed home, and how that had felt like rejection rather than my escape from his privilege. About the moment he realized that stealing from Grandma was not a victimless crime, because elderly people cannot rebuild what is taken from them. The final paragraph destroyed me. I don't know if I'll ever be the brother Victoria deserved, but I'm trying to be the man Grandma believed I could become. Not the heir, not the favorite, just someone who shows up when he says he will and keeps promises even when they're hard. I called Marcus. He met the conditions, released the funds. 3 days later, Garrett called. Vic, I just got a notification from the bank. $2.3 million. I thought maybe the conditions were a test you didn't expect me to pass. They were a test Grandma expected you to pass. She never stopped believing you could change. She just needed you to believe it too. I heard him crying on the other end of the line. Thank you. I know I don't deserve it, but thank you. You don't deserve it because of who you were. You earned it because of who you're becoming. Don't waste it. I hung up before the conversation could turn maudlin. Garrett's redemption was his to forge. I could witness it, but I could not manufacture it. That evening, I met my father for the first time in 18 months. He had requested dinner at a diner near the coast. Neutral territory, cheap coffee and laminated menus. Richard looked hollowed out. The years had not been kind. His hair had gone completely gray. His hands shook slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. Victoria, thank you for agreeing to meet. His voice carried none of its former authority, just the quiet exhaustion of someone who had lost a war they thought they would win. What do you want, Dad? I wanted to apologize. Not for your forgiveness. I don't deserve that. But because you deserve to hear it. He stared into his coffee, unable to meet my eyes. I was wrong. About Garrett, about you, about what mattered. I spent 40 years building a legacy, and I nearly destroyed it by trying to force it into the wrong hands. Why Garrett? I had never asked the question directly, never demanded an explanation for the preference that had shaped my entire childhood. Richard finally looked up, because I saw myself in him, the charm, the confidence, the ability to make people like him. I thought those were the qualities that built success. But I was wrong. Success is built by people like you and your grandmother, people who show up when no one is watching, people who do the hard work because it needs doing, not because it earns applause. He reached across the table, not touching me but offering the gesture. I can't undo 32 years of failure, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Not because of the money, because you're honorable in a world that rewards corruption. I looked at my father, this man who had weaponized my strength against me, who had chosen complicity over courage, who had let my mother weaponize my resilience to excuse his favoritism. I forgive you, Dad. Not because you've earned it, but because I refuse to carry the weight of hating you for the rest of my life. I leaned forward. But forgiveness is not amnesia. I'll pay for your medical bills through the foundation. I'll make sure you and Mom have housing. But you will never advise me on business. You will never manipulate me again. Those are the terms. Richard nodded slowly, accepting the boundaries. Fair. We finished our coffee in silence. When we parted in the parking lot, he hesitated. Your grandmother would be proud. I hope so. I drove away, leaving him standing beside his aging Camry, a man who had finally learned that love measured in dollars and favoritism was not love at all. On a Thursday in June, 2 years after Eleanor Sterling's death, I stood at the grand opening of the Eleanor Sterling Community Center. The building had been a derelict warehouse, abandoned for 15 years, structural damage making it unrentable. I bought it for $800,000, spent another $700,000 on renovation. transformed it into a community space offering financial literacy courses, legal clinics, and housing assistance for low-income families. Thomas Chen had designed the renovation, his first major commission outside academia. The space was light, open, welcoming. Exposed brick from the original structure blended with modern glass and steel. History and future in conversation. Natalie created a mural on the south wall, vibrant colors depicting 3 generations of women building something together. Sarah managed the foundation that would operate the center, ensuring sustainability without dependence on my continued funding. Marcus provided pro bono legal services 2 evenings per week, helping tenants navigate eviction proceedings and housing discrimination. Garrett worked construction on the renovation, his labor contributing to something larger than himself. Even my mother attended the opening, standing at the back of the crowd, crying quietly as I cut the ribbon. At the ceremony, I spoke briefly. My grandmother taught me that buildings are not just structures, they are promises. Promises of shelter, promises of safety, promises of possibility. This center is a promise that Sterling Properties will never again prioritize profit over people. After the speeches, Thomas found me on the roof deck, overlooking the neighborhood we had helped transform. You did it. You took something broken and made it beautiful. I looked at the community center, then at the broader landscape of San Diego stretching toward the ocean. I'm not done. This is just the first building. Good. The world needs more architects who understand that success is not about extraction. It's about creation. He handed me a rolled blueprint. This is my proposal for the next project, a mixed-use development. Affordable housing on the lower floors, commercial space above. We use the commercial rent to subsidize the residential. Self-sustaining model. I unrolled the blueprint, studying his design. It was brilliant, elegant, exactly what the neighborhood needed. Let's build it. That night, I returned to my townhouse in North Park. The space was no longer empty. I had furnished it slowly, deliberately. Every piece chosen because I liked it rather than because it matched some decorator's vision. In my studio, I opened the small velvet box Grandma had left in the safe deposit box. Inside was the ring, "Build something beautiful." I took out the diamond engagement ring my father had given me years ago. The 2-carat stone that was supposed to compensate for every time he chose Garrett over me. I had kept it out of spite, a reminder of what conditional love looked like in crystalline form. Tomorrow, I would sell it. Use the money to fund scholarships for daughters of military families, girls who were told they were too strong to need support, too competent to deserve investment. I would name it the Build Something Beautiful Scholarship. Tonight, I sat at my drafting table and opened my journal, the one I had started the night of the funeral. Day 730, 2 years since I remembered my own name. Today, I am 34 years old. I am not Victoria Sterling, daughter of Richard and Diane, sister of Garrett. I am Victoria Eleanor Sterling, architect, landlord, human being. The diamond ring bought me nothing but resentment. Freedom, though? Freedom is priceless. I lost 30 years waiting for someone to see my value. But I have at least 30 more. And this time, I'm not giving a single day to anyone who cannot see it themselves. I closed the journal and looked around my studio. Blueprints covered one wall. A 3D printer hummed quietly in the corner. My drafting table held the beginnings of my next design, a housing complex that would prioritize beauty and affordability in equal measure. I had become what Grandma always knew I could be. Not the heir who inherited wealth, the architect who built it. Outside my window, the city glowed with evening light, 10,000 buildings representing 10,000 visions of what shelter could mean. And somewhere in that landscape, in spaces I had not yet imagined, were structures waiting to be designed by someone who understood that the foundation matters more than the facade, that the strength that allows you to stand alone is the same strength that allows you to choose who stands beside you, that there is no inheritance more valuable than the permission to become yourself. I turned off the desk lamp and stood at the window, watching the city breathe. Tomorrow, I would design another building, host another tenant meeting, teach another financial literacy course at the community center. But tonight, I simply stood in the space I had created, in the life I had built from the rubble of what they tried to take from me, and allowed myself to feel what I had been trained to suppress for 3 decades. Not victory, not vindication, just the quiet revolutionary act of being enough exactly as I was. The stone they rejected had not become the cornerstone through force or anger. It had become the cornerstone through the simple, radical choice to build when everyone expected me to crumble. And now, standing in my own space, wearing my grandmother's ring, looking at blueprints for a future I was designing rather than inheriting, I finally understood what she had been trying to teach me all along. They did not reject me because I was inadequate. They rejected me because I was capable, and my capability threatened their comfortable narrative about who deserved what. But rejection is not death. Rejection is excavation. It strips away everything that is not essential, leaving only the foundation strong enough to support whatever you choose to build upon it. I had been excavated, stripped down to steel and stone, and now I was building something they could never have imagined. Not a dynasty, not an empire. Just a life, honest, earned mine. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one. Each window a story of someone building their own version of home. And in my studio, in my townhouse, in my life, I was finally building mine. Not because someone gave me permission, because I stopped waiting for it.